Serious, what is your story about having a horrible gut feeling about a person or situation that turned out to be dead on? I was at a party once at an apartment complex that's known for its sketchy tenants. I only knew a few people there, so I just stuck with one of my friends. Halfway through the party, a girl, I'll call her Sally, I met a few months back at a job showed up with two guys who just seemed really shady, pushing drugs, feeding this girl tons of whiskey even though she was underage. No one really knew who invited them. Full stop. By 11 PM Sally was fucked up. My friend and I leave to go get beer and come back an hour later. Sally is on the floor in the back room convulsing and foaming at the mouth. Her friend she showed up with refused to allow me to take her to the bath and make her throw up. Chaos ensues. I leave. While walking back to my friend's apartment I called 911 cause I knew something was seriously wrong with her. The EMTs show up and take her to the hospital. 2 days later she messages me on FB to tell me the doctors found multiple drugs in her system that she didn't choose to take. She suspects her friends but isn't sure. I'm positive it was them. 6 months later a news article is posted. One of the sketchy guys was arrested for running a child trafficking business from a nearby hotel. So basically the second I saw these dudes show up with my acquaintance Sally I knew something was fishy. And I was right. Those guys were crappy people. Human trafficking is no joke. You saved her life in more ways than one. My mother, around 9-10 years at the time, was eating dinner with her family and someone knocked at the front door. Her dad, my grandfather, got up to answer and it was a salesman. My grandfather politely declined whatever product he was selling and whatever spiel he was going to go on. As they were having family dinner, the salesman was very aggressive and trying to continue speaking and even tried to invite himself inside their home. At that point my usually level-headed grandfather gets upset and says something along the lines of "You need to leave now." Finally the salesman gives up and proceeds to the next house. But not before my grandfather called the neighbors to warn them. The young female neighbor answered the phone and said she was home alone, so my grandfather told her to not answer the door whatsoever. Fast forward a few months and the salesman turns out to be a serial killer, targeting young women home by themselves and posing as a salesman. To sum it all up, my grandfather may have very well saved his neighbor's life. Always reminds me to trust my gut when I get a bad feeling. Your grandfather's a good guy for looking out for his neighbors. When I was in my early 20s my roommate brought home a new guy she was dating. He had these crazy eyes and just seemed bizarre. He ended up drinking a bottle of Jägermeister and passed out. She dated him for around 6 months. I moved out shortly after she split with him. Several years later he was in the news. His name was Larry Bright. He is a serial killer in Illinois. Lovely. My sister-in-law was a higher level exec in a company. She introduced me to her boss, the CEO. At that moment I knew they were having an affair. Nothing outward. Strictly intuition. She was married to my wife's brother, and when I told my wife she said I was nuts. Within months we learned I was right. She divorced, and went on to marry her boss. I gave birth in November to a baby girl who had a very rare neurological disorder. She hardly moved at all in utero, but when I told my doctors, they all said that every pregnancy baby is different, etc. I have a healthy son, so I tried to put my worries to bed. We had a completely normal pregnancy, totally normal tests, no indication of trouble. Then she was born. The second she opened her eyes for the first time, I got a horrible, sinking feeling in my gut. There was no there behind her eyes. We were still in the delivery room. There were pictures taken and in every one, I look, wary, scared. There were immediate problems. She didn't latch. She had no reflexes, etc., etc., etc. I shoved all my worries down. She was born a few weeks early. Everyone kept saying, bottle feed her and she'll perk up once she gets closer to her due date. Every nurse, every doctor, every lactation consultant. We were released from the hospital with a healthy baby. Nope, nope, nope. A week later, we were back in the NICU because she was still lethargic. She wasn't eating. It turns out she was basically brain dead the entire time. I didn't want to know, but I knew. I knew the moment I looked in her eyes. ETA. The diagnosis was Ohtahara syndrome, a catastrophic and fatal epilepsy disorder of infancy. No family history of seizures. A complete surprise, medically speaking. We took her home from the NICU and she passed away in our arms at 16 days old. So while I was in welding school there was an older fella around 50ish. Anyways, every morning we'd all meet up in class, go over book stuff and then out to the shop to practice our skill. As the semester went on all of us students would talk and visit, except this one guy. Every morning I would be like, "Hey man, how's it going?" and he'd always ignore any attempts to be social. Eventually I joked to one of my buddies about how he might be a serial killer or something. Fast forward 6 months and I'm getting alerts about this guy being hunted down by the police and to report anything. Come to find out he had a woman he kidnapped living in a tiny plywood box. Eventually the police found him, but not before he killed her oldest son. Terribly sad story. I had a nightmare that my dad died. Come morning, I texted my mom to check in. I didn't want to bother my dad with my silly dream and my mom wouldn't think it was weird to text just to check in. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer that morning. He's gonna be fine, though. There was knock on the shared front door. The house was broken into 3 flats. I was the ground floor. I recognized the guy at the door as the boyfriend of the pretty little Asian woman who lived a couple of floors above us. And he smiled at me and asked if he could come in and wait for her in the hallway. A nice looking white guy, very upper middle class with a tweed jacket and posh accent. Good manners, winning smile. My stomach did a flip and I said no and shut the door in his face very abruptly. I had no idea why I reacted as badly as I did because I knew him to say hi to, and I knew he spent the night in the building a lot. A couple of days later I see her with her face swollen and purple where he had beaten her to a pulp. Apparently she had been in a hospital for a few days. She stopped me in the hallway and said if I ever saw the boyfriend again I was to call the police. I'm guessing I subconsciously picked up on some non-verbal cue from when I saw them together. Good manners, winning smile. This may be one of the things that set you off. Most people don't know how to consciously identify a false versus a real smile, but it can be done subconsciously. This guy was a kindergarten teacher at my school. Everyone loved him. He was great with the kids, and his whole room was covered in SpongeBob stuff. Everyone wanted their kid in his class. He was close with a lot of parents, and therefore their kids, outside of the classroom. This might sound a bit odd, but it's not where I'm from. Despite all this guy made me sick just looking at him. I would get really anxious around him, and when my friends said let's go talk to Mr. X I would make some excuse to stay away from him. I never could really figure out why I felt like this. Anyway, eventually he moved away with his wife, much to everyone's dismay. Probably 10 years later, it came out he had been arrested for possession of child P, and he had also been in some of said pictures. It was really horrible for my whole community. I'm glad I felt off about him though and stayed away. Guys like him really make it hard for men who want to work in primary education. It's the reason my brother changed his focus to secondary education instead of primary. Years ago I was in another state due to a family member being hospitalized. The hospital was very close to a sketchy rundown area and my family and I had stopped to get gas. This guy in a hoodie walks up while I'm pumping gas looking kinda out of it and hits me up for coffee money. I had a very bad feeling about him, and so not wanting to pee him off I carefully gave him a bit of change I had in my pocket, explaining I wasn't carrying any cash on me, all the while watching him and all around to make sure I could do something if necessary. He thanked me and went on his way. A few days later and back home I saw his face on the news. He was arrested for killing a bunch of women and ditching the bodies in the nearby abandoned houses. This is the kind of thing that makes me want to never go out in public again. So a couple years ago I used to work out a lot at this gym a couple miles from my house. There was this personal trainer who worked there, and we would occasionally shoot the crap about fitness, working out etc. Whiling away time in the sauna. Well, one day I finish a workout and go into the locker room and open the door to the sauna. And there's the personal trainer guy, acting out this horrifically violent shadow boxing routine. It's steamy in the sauna so it takes him a tad longer than instantaneously to realize I just walked in. He stops abruptly as if to avoid embarrassment. I thought he was just goofing off or something, but then I saw this insane look in his eye, like he had actually just got done fighting in a war with Spartans. Seriously, his face was crazy. I always thought he was a little off his rocker after that. Anyway, couple months later the guy gets arrested for taking home a Tinder date, chopping her body up and burying the corpse in the woods. So yeah, I guess off the rocker he was indeed. My sister had a boyfriend 10 years older than her. I didn't have a problem with the age gap, even though the fact that he had his first child when my sister was 13 kinda weirded me out. Age doesn't matter as much when you're adults, right? They weren't dating long, but she intentionally got pregnant 6 months into the relationship. I was really excited to meet him during a family trip, seeing as he's the father of my niece. Upon meeting him I got a strange vibe from him, and found myself anxious at the idea of being alone with him. He didn't do or say anything strange though, and generally seemed like a nice guy. Still, when it was just me and him I felt incredibly tense, like he would try to rape me at any moment. I stayed at my sister's place for a few days, then went home in the next province over. He added me on Facebook, and then I got a message saying he thought I was super cute and he wanted to get together. He literally tried to cheat on my sister with me. He tried to cheat on my sister who was 6 months pregnant. I didn't reply. I just screen capped the message and sent it to my sister and my mom, asking my mom to look out for my sister since her boyfriend is a puddle of grease. After some issues, my sister is now a single mother. Man, I wish my sister had morals like you. Neighbors have 2 kids. They were 6 years old girl and 4 years old boy at the time. The wife's brother took care of the kids while both parents worked. The brother gave off a creepy vibe, and I wouldn't let my daughter, she was 8 or 9 at the time, go inside their house when the wife's brother was there alone with the kids. The husband comes home one day, find him performing oral sex on the little girl. Husband beats his butt out into the yard and is arrested. He's still in jail a few years later, but I still won't let my kid into their house. I just got very sick to my stomach. Whoa, I was not ready for that, although I felt like that's where this was going. There was actually a girl I grew up with who was loosely a part of my greater social circle who always kinda creeped me out. I'd actually brought this up with some closer, male friends and they seemed to agree. If you asked me to say why, I really can't even explain it. She was a bit ditzy but very friendly and just overall nice. Never said a bad thing about anyone or found herself in any drama, but it was just like she was almost missing some human component. Anyways, we lost touch after high school, but a few years after that she had a kid and a few years after that she got sent to prison for years for basically doing that Munchausen by proxy thing. She was poisoning her kid and the doctors caught her, I guess. Luckily the kid lived and is with the father, who by all measures is a decent guy. I've told this story before and it's really frustrating because I really can't articulate anything specific about her that gave me the creeps, but there it is. Certain people are easily creeped out or unsettled by people who have certain psychopathic or sociopathic traits. Usually comes down to their lack of empathy. Usually the people can't really explain it other than by saying something just seems off. Guy I used to work with was constantly offering to give me driving lessons out in the countryside. We got along at work well enough and he said he thought it was weird that I was an adult who couldn't drive. I was like 18, so not that weird but weird for the Midwest US. I had a weird gut feeling. I've had them before and they had never steered me wrong. I turned him down repeatedly. He ends up asking my other co-worker to go out with him instead, just for a friendly drive. He raped her. My gut is never wrong. Except about eating extra tacos. Except about eating extra tacos. Nice punchline to your rape story. My ex. She would constantly tell me things that seemed like they could be true with just enough details to make them believable, but were also just a little bit exaggerated, so it made her seem like her role in the story was more important or more unique. It always felt a little off, but she always had the benefit of plausible deniability on her side. Example, one morning I was waking up for work and she told me there was a huge screaming match at the neighbor's house where the 2 parents were fighting and making a scene. Her role in it was that she took their kids elsewhere while it was going on to keep them out of harm's way. The police were called and the man was escorted off to jail. Since I hadn't heard any of this going on, she just told me, yeah, you were out like a rock, which was quite possible. But it was all a fabrication just for her to have a story that made her seem interesting and important. Turns out she was a pathological liar and almost none of those things were true at all. My gut knew, but my brain reasoned the sense out of me. I was sleeping in bed with my then husband and my daughter was in her crib across the room. I dreamt that his sister was force feeding her cake until she was choking. I remember something telling me get up, she's choking. I jumped out of bed scaring my ex and ran and pulled her out of the crib. She was face smashed into the bed choking on her spit up. I hit her back and she coughed it all up and was breathing normal again in a few seconds. I honestly have no idea why I dreamt that his sister was doing that, but somehow I knew that she was choking. It's surreal how our senses work. You probably heard her choking and your mind found a way to interpret those sounds into a dream. It happens to me all the time. So, playing designated driver. I'm at a stoplight. When it turns green, my gut says nope, we are cool right here. So 3 drunks in the back, and 1 up front, all explaining that I should have let them drive, what the green light means, how to operate the long vertical pedal, etc. All very helpful. Just as I shrug and shake it off, a black Camaro with its lights off shoots through the red light, loses control and crashes into a telephone pole. Would have T-boned me 100%. The drunks are all in awe of my psychic power. Then the Camaro, flames shooting out from under the crushed hood, backed up and drove off. Super surreal. Ex's friends were buttholes. I got that vibe off them based on little remarks they would make towards others and all around just had a bad feeling about them. I tried to explain to my ex why I thought that, and he said I was being dramatic and jealous of them. Fast forward a few months later, I get word that they were at a party and one of the other friends fell and hit his head pretty hard on the pavement, to the point where blood was coming out and he blacked out. Butthole friends leave him there all by himself because they didn't want to deal with the EMSs and still wanted to party. I can see why he's an ex. Great way to get a sense of someone's character is to look at their friends. My best friend's family was visiting. Best friend and her dad had asked to see the new fossils I'd added to my collection, so I went upstairs to get them. Her dad was allergic to my guinea pig, who lived in my room. As I turned the corner I noticed my younger brother, who I call Sean online, was wearing his pajamas. It was barely 9 PM. Sean never went to bed that early. I asked him why he'd changed. Sean told me that he felt really sick, and dad had told him to go to bed and see if he felt better in the morning. Sean didn't look that sick, but something just felt off. I asked if mom knew Sean didn't feel good. He said no, he'd just talked to dad. That wasn't okay. And not because mom would have been upset if nobody told her Sean didn't feel good. It felt more serious than that. Mom had to know Sean was sick. I started to flip out and snapped at Sean that he should never trust dad's medical advice. Dad just tells people to sleep earlier and exercise more. Sean needed to tell mom. Now, Sean very clearly thought I was overreacting. Heck, I thought I might be overreacting. But he went downstairs and told mom he didn't feel good. First thing mom did, as per usual, was check him for rashes. He had a red streak running from his thumb up to his armpit. Sean had severe blood poisoning. We found out later from the hospital he was 4 hours away from death. If I hadn't had such a strong feeling that Sean had to tell mom he didn't feel good, he wouldn't be alive today. He'd have died in his sleep that night. For a second there I thought this story was going in a whole other direction. When I was about 3 or 4 years old I was playing in the yard in a bikini, like the cutesy little kid ones with ruffles, and I remember I was sticking my belly out really far because I thought it was cool that I could see my belly in my bathing suit. An adult male family member was over visiting and I remember feeling like someone was looking at me. So I turned around and noticed that he was watching me. I remember feeling scared and I sucked my belly in and started looking for my mom. The man said, "Oh, you have such a cute little tummy," and I just remember feeling absolutely panicked in a way I had never felt before. I never told my mom, but as I was growing up that family member would invite some of the kids over for sleepovers with his adopted son, but my mother would never allow me to go. She always told him that I needed to up for some activity early in the morning or that I was up late the night before and needed to sleep. I also never forgot that panicked feeling and never would allow myself to be alone with him. If he walked into a room I was in, I would make an excuse to leave and then go stick like glue next to my mother. As you can probably assume, that man was indicted on federal charges of possession of child pornography, distribution of child p, sexual assault, rape, statutory rape, etc. My mom and I talked about it later and she said that she never had any concrete reasons to not trust him, but she just felt compelled to listen to her gut in this instance. That was honestly one of the most important lessons she taught me. Sometimes your gut picks up things that your conscious doesn't, but those instincts are there for a reason. My mom also called my cell phone seconds after I wrecked my car miles away from her because she got this strong auditory hallucination of me yelling, "Mom, she's a witch." Your mom sounds like such a great mom. My parents like to help people who honestly don't deserve the opportunity. You can't save people from themselves. They hired this farmhand who I knew was shady as crap the first time I ever laid eyes on him. He had just gotten out of jail and was a addict. They gave this guy free range over their farm truck, their tools and all of their farm equipment. My step-dad was dying of cancer at the time and the farmhand promised he would maintain the farm after my dad was gone. Tools and equipment had been disappearing for a few months before my dad's death, but afterwards, it was at a rapid pace. The day we called him out, my husband went through a few boxes my dad had as inventory before his death. A lot was missing: silver coins, pocket watch and other valuables. When the farmhand returned to the farm, he proudly exclaimed that the chainsaw had mysteriously vanished from the bed of the farm truck while he was at the gas station. When we confronted him about the missing items, he admitted that he took them to protect them. His mother called us to tell us whatever he didn't pawn underneath her house. Good riddance. He was a pose. It takes a special kind of evil to steal from the dead. This is basically how the Elizabeth Smart story started. Her parents hired a drifter to do yard work. Ages ago, I was maybe 9 years old. We were on our way home from the local pool when a massive summer storm started. I'm talking full on garbage bins flying through the air and literally feeling how the wind was moving our car a bit to the left. So we enter this tunnel and I suddenly scream stop at the top of my lungs. My mother slows down and asks me, confused about what's going on. I, now crying, beg her to stop the car and wait the storm out. She tells me that she can't just stop the car in the middle of the street in a tunnel and promises me to drive slow and carefully. Just as we were able to see the end of the tunnel, a small tree falls onto the street, followed by a gigantic 300 kilograms rock. That stone would have hit and squished us. It even left a bump in the road. I have absolutely no idea what gave me the feeling, but I am very glad that it was there. My college professor in my freshman year always gave me a creepy vibe. During my sophomore year I saw him in the news for being in a child pornography ring. Not exactly a horrible situation, so maybe this doesn't count. But it was finals time and I was studying my butt off for stat, which was that day, and Spanish, which was the next. I usually locked myself into the office and studied there. Well, I felt really antsy and had a strong gut feeling to go to campus. I lived 20 minutes away, which I normally wouldn't do because I had 3 hours till my stat test. Still, I decided to go and ended up studying in the cafeteria. Took a break from studying statistics and was working on Spanish. Suddenly this dude I had never talked to, but was in my Spanish class, walked up to my table and asks if I'm ready for the test. We start talking about Spanish and I learned that apparently the teacher decided to change the test day and I hadn't read the email she sent out about it. So the test was in like 30 minutes. It's weird when I think about how so many things had to happen for me to make it to my Spanish test, all starting with that gut feeling. Pretty sure that changing a test date on short notice is inexcusable, and if you had missed it she would have had to give you another chance to take it. When I was 14 or 15 I was living with my mom most of the time, seeing my dad every other weekend and some evenings. I was going to my dad's for a long weekend, Thursday morn, and I had this intense feeling that I should take my cat with me. I thought about asking my dad if I could, but figured he would say no, so I didn't. I told my mom as I left, don't doubt her outside. If she wants out she will use my bedroom window. 4 days later I come home and ask where my cat is. My mom looks baffled and says, "Oh, I don't know. I haven't seen her since I let her outside after you left. She was hit by a car that night." One night I was out walking my dog on the same route we walked every night. I lived in a neighborhoody part, that is, pretty much all residential, narrow streets, 25 miles per hour speed limit. Stop signs on practically every intersection of a major city. It was dusk and weirdly foggy, which muffled the normal city noise and made everything feel a little eerie. We reached an intersection that was a four-way stop. I looked both ways and there was nothing coming, so I went to step into the crosswalk. Immediately I got a chill down my spine and pulled my dog back onto the sidewalk with me. I quickly looked again, and for the block or two I could see in the fog and darkness there was still nothing visible and no noise of oncoming traffic. I hesitated one more second, feeling really silly and paranoid, when a car zoomed out of the fog, going incredibly fast, no headlights, and completely blew through the stop sign. It was quickly out of sight again in the fog, but seconds later I heard a loud crash. The car had T-boned an SUV 3 blocks away when it ran another stop sign. The car was completely destroyed. I called 911 and police and ambulances were quickly on scene. Luckily it was a huge SUV, so the people in that car were mostly okay. The driver of the car was taken in an ambulance. I later heard that the driver did live, but that he was drunk and they estimated going over 60 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. If he had hit my dog and I, which he almost certainly would have if I had kept crossing, we'd likely both be dead. I pay much more attention to my gut feelings, or as I call it, my lizard brain, now. I call it lizard brain, too, and it saves my bacon. My form tutor went part-time in year 9, so another teacher took over on the days she wasn't in. I found the guy creepy and never liked him, but everyone else did because he was relaxed and nice to them. Also, he once poked me in the neck for no reason. 2 years pass and in the autumn of year 11 the teacher is gone, as is a girl in my form. Turns out he was a pedophile and now he's in prison somewhere. I didn't want my feeling to be right. Back in college, my 2 roommates and I all had motorcycles and would occasionally go for a ride together. One day, they invite me on a group ride with a few of their other buddies. I immediately declined, mostly because I don't like riding in larger groups, and also because I'm careful about riding around other riders with whom I'm not yet familiar of their riding style, etc. My roommates both kept asking me to go. It's just a couple of hours and dinner, come out with us. But I just had a feeling some crap was gonna go down. Sure enough, a couple of the other guys kept screwing around doing wheelies, burnouts, etc. The cops were called on them and caught up to them on the freeway where some of them ran. One of the guys who fled had an almost identical bike to mine. APBs including a helicopter overhead searching for these clowns. I was glad I didn't feel like getting to know those guys. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.